Grand rising, grand arrival, grand return. Peace and blessings to the righteous and the repentant alike. I am Sophia Spiritualite, and you're tuned into Don't Miss It podcast with Sophia Spiritualite here on the MariKaNa News Network. This is one of our 3 weekly podcasts where we cover news and events for a particular week on the first 2 days of the podcast, and on the third day we cover executive actions. So this is pretty interesting what we have going on. There's a lot of executive actions, a lot of presidential orders, and it's really difficult to keep up with all of them. So we pick out one that is particularly important and will have a lot of effects on our community, and that's where we dig into. So this is the week of January 27th through February 2nd. Of course, today's actual date, literal date, is March the 15th, so we always get a little bit behind to see how these things play out, because it's not important that we're at the front of the line, but that we are reporting what's important. So the presidential action we're going to cover today is going to be unleashing prosperity through deregulation. This was published on January the 31st, 2025. And so we're just going to read through this and make some commentary. But before I even get started, I want y'all to understand that it's not the laws that are the problem. It's the regulations. And the regulations are actually put in place by the bureaucrats. Congress does not make regulations in that format. When they produce a law, the law has statutes in it, which, I mean, that's also illegal, but it's at least quote unquote elected officials. And then the elected officials turn that information over to the executive branch, i.e. the bureaucrats, because all the bureaucrats are in the executive branch. Understand that. They turn it over to the executive branch to actually implement their laws. And this is where most of the problems come in, because the bureaucrats are unelected. A great deal of them, they, in their own words, profess not to work for anyone. So even though they're clearly paid by the executive branch, overseen by the executive branch, they do not do the will of the executive. At least they haven't, because they believe that they're independent. And so this is, a part of bringing all of these things back into the proper order, because it is my theory, and I stick to it, that there's nothing wrong with the actual country, the way that it's run. The problem is that no one wants to be held accountable for what they do, and they also don't want to be held accountable by anyone else. So instead of doing the right thing, following the rules, being reasonable, these individuals choose to go a different route because they are beholden to whoever is, giving them that money on the side. And as we've seen with the USAID, this is pretty extensive throughout the government. All right, so let's read this. Unleashing prosperity through deregulation. By the authority vested in me as president by the Constitution and the laws of the United States of America, including the Budget and Accounting Act of 1921 as amended, which is 31 USC 1101, and in order to promote prudent financial management and alleviate unnecessary regulatory burdens, it is hereby ordered. Section 1, Purpose. The ever-extending morass of complicated federal regulation imposes massive costs on the lives of millions of Americans, creates a substantial restraint on our economic growth and ability to build and innovate, and hampers our global competitiveness. Despite the magnitude of their impact, these measures are often difficult for the average person or business to understand, as they require synthesizing the collective meaning not just of formal regulations, but also rules, memoranda, administrative orders, guidance documents, policy statements, and interagency agreements that are not subject to the Administrative Procedure Act, further increasing compliance costs and the risk of non-compliance. It is the policy of my administration to significantly reduce the private expenditures required to comply with federal regulations to secure America's economic prosperity and national security and the highest possible quality of life for each citizen. To that end, it is important that for each new regulation issued, at least 10 prior regulations be identified for elimination. This practice is to ensure that the cost of planned regulations is responsibly managed and controlled through a rigorous regulatory budgeting process. Section 2, Policy. It is the policy of the executive branch to be prudent and financially responsible in the expenditure of funds from both public and private sources and to alleviate unnecessary regulatory burdens placed on the American people. Section 3. Regulatory cap for fiscal year 25. A. Unless prohibited by law, whenever an executive department or agency publicly proposes for notice and comment or otherwise promulgates a new regulation, it shall identify at least 10 existing regulations to be repealed. B. For fiscal year 25, which is in progress, the heads of all agencies are directed to ensure that the total incremental cost of all new regulations, including repealed regulations, being finalized this year shall be significantly less than zero, as determined by the Director of the Office of Management and Budget, unless otherwise required by law or instructions from the Director. C. In furtherance of the requirement of the subsection A of this section, any new incremental costs associated with new regulations shall be, to the extent permitted by law, be offset by the elimination of existing costs associated with at least 10 prior regulations. D. The Director shall provide the heads of agencies with guidance on implementation of this section. Such guidance shall address, among other things, processes for standardizing the measurement and estimation of regulatory costs, standards for determining what qualifies as new and offsetting regulations, standards for determining the cost of existing regulations that are considered for elimination, processes for accounting for costs in different fiscal years, methods to oversee the issuance of rules with costs offset by savings at different times or different agencies, and emergencies and other circumstances that might justify individual waivers of the requirements of this section. The Director of OMB shall consider phasing in and updating these requirements. Section 4. Annual regulatory cost submissions to the Office of Management and Budget. Beginning with the regulatory plans as required under Executive Order 12866 of September 30th, 1993, Regulatory Planning and Review, as amended, or any successor order for the fiscal year of 2026. For each fiscal year thereafter, A. The head of each agency shall identify on aggregated basis for regulations that increase incremental costs the offsetting regulations described in Section 3C of this order, and provide the agency's best approximation of the total cost or savings associated with each new regulation or repealed regulation. B. Each regulation approved by the Director during the presidential budget process shall be included in the unified regulatory agenda required under Executive Order 12866 as amended, or any successor order. Unless otherwise required by law, no regulation shall be added to or removed from the unified regulatory agenda without the approval of the Director. To accomplish the purposes of this order, the Director may also require additions to the unified regulatory agenda and regulatory plan. C. Unless otherwise required by law, no regulation shall be issued by an agency if it was not included in the most recent version or update of the published Unified Regulatory Agenda as required under Executive Order 12866 as amended, or any successor order, unless the issuance of such regulation was approved in advance in writing by the Director. D. During the presidential budget process, the director shall identify agencies, a total amount of incremental calls that will be allowed for each agency in issuing new regulations and repealing regulations for each fiscal year after fiscal year 2025. No regulations exceeding the agency's total incremental calls allowance will be permitted in that fiscal year unless required by law or approved in writing by the director. The total incremental calls allowance may allow an increase or require a reduction in total regulatory calls. E. The director shall provide the heads of agencies with guidance on the implementation of the requirements of this section. Section 5. For purposes of this order, the term regulation or rule means an agency statement of general or particular applicability and future effect designed to implement, interpret, or prescribe law or policy, or to describe the procedure or practice requirements of an agency, including, without limitation, regulations, rules, memoranda, administrative orders, guidance documents, policy statements, interagency agreements, regardless of whether the same were enacted through the processes in the Administrative Procedure Act, but does not include A. Regulations issued with respect to a military, national security, homeland security, foreign affairs, or immigration-related function in the United States. B. Regulations related to agency organization, management, or personnel. Or C. Any other specific regulation or category of regulations exempted by the director, who shall exempt those regulations or categories of regulations that impose minimal costs or burdens on the private sector, or that are requested to be exempted by the assistant to the president and chief of staff of the assistant to the president and deputy chief of staff for policy. Section 6. Implementation. The director is charged with implementing this order, including by providing agencies with updated guidance on implementing the 10-for-1 rule described in Section 3A of this order, including processes for identifying regulations for elimination, determining what constitutes generally and specifically a rule or regulation for purposes of this order, estimating and standardizing regulatory calls, and ensuring compliance with the Administrative Procedures Act and other applicable laws. B. The director shall revoke OMB Circular A4 of November 9, 2023, regulatory analysis, and all accompanying appendices, guidelines, documents, and shall reinstate the prior version of Circular A4 issued on September 17, 2003. And C. The Secretary of the Treasury and the Director shall reinstate the Memorandum of Agreement between Department of Treasury and the Office of Management of Budget of April 11, 2018 regarding review of tax regulations under Executive Order 12866. Section 7. Severability. If any provision of this order or the application of any provision to any person or circumstance is held to be invalid, the remainder of this order and the application of its provisions to any other persons or circumstances shall not be affected thereby. Section 8. General Provisions. A. Nothing in this order shall be construed to impair or otherwise affect I. The authority granted by law to an executive department, agency, or the head thereof. 2. The functions of the Director of the Office of Management and Budget relating to budgetary, administrative, or legislative proposals. B. This order shall be implemented consistent with the applicable law and subject to the availability of appropriations. C. This order is not intended and does not create any right or benefit, substantive or procedural, enforceable at law or in equity by any party against the United States, its departments, agencies, or entities, its officers, employees, or agents, or any other person. The White House, January 31st, 2025. There's a lot to unpack in this. First, I think let's just talk a little bit about how this country works when it comes to regulation, because I don't think people have a clear idea of what happens. And so let's look at let's take the IRS, for example, okay? You have the federal or the Congress. Okay, the Congress passes tax law, tax a tax bill. Okay, let's say that the Congress passes a tax bill. When they pass this tax bill, they are not going line by line through the tax code to pass their bill, nor is what they're giving actually implementable based on what they've written. It's a really, it's kind of insane actually, how this country works. But basically what they do is they say, okay, this is what's allowed, this is what's not allowed for purposes of what they're willing to pay for. Because the Congress, specifically the House of Representatives, has the power of the purse. So they determine what gets paid for and how much something is going to be paid for something. This is what they do. And so once that bill is passed, in order for it to be implemented by the executive branch, like the words that we're using, memoranda, letters, orders, regulations, all those things have to be written, because when Congress passes a law, it's not necessarily interpreting how that law is going to be put into place. That's the executive branch that determines how the law is going to be put into place. So, for example, with tax law, what they do is they may take, because they don't pass tax bills every time, but they will take those things that were delineated in the bill that the House and the Senate passed, and they will take that over to the IRS and say, okay, how are we going to put this bill into law or into a practice? Because the bills are not practical. Cancel. Bills are not practical. Okay, bills are bills, and they have to be put into practice. That's what we, the people, choose the executive branch to do: put the bills into practice. So once it gets over to the IRS, then the director of the IRS, director of the Treasury, senior executive service members then go to all of their people who are paying them on the side and ask them, how do we put this in so that y'all are not affected? The people who are actually paying us our salary, not the American people. No. The people who are paying them their off the book salary. And so then they write these laws and these rules and these regulations to benefit their benefactors. And American people are left with nothing. This is how it actually works. Many such cases. This goes for everything. They pass a crime bill. The crime bill goes to Department of Justice, the head of Department of Justice, the deputy, all those people, they go to their benefactors who are paying them on the side, and they say, how do we implement these bills so that it doesn't affect you? And then they write the rules and regulations, not in the benefit of the American people, but in the benefit of their benefactors. Okay? This happens all of the time. Over and over and over again, you see this same practice. And so what this order does, it says, okay, well, if you're going, first of all, there's limit. First of all, when you have a bill, what happens is, one of the things that happens is that the GAO, Government Accountability Office, they score the bill saying how much they think it's going to cost to implement the bill. And one thing that the Republicans are always harping on is that, we don't want to have a bill that costs too much to implement. They want it to be in order. They don't want it to be out of control, whatever the case may be, right? So people like Rand Paul and Thomas Massey, if they have issues, that's the point when they're supposed to bring their issues up, not with a continuing resolution. They know the processes, and yet they do this stuff, and you're supposed to believe them that they're the good guys. That's insane. So when the GAO scores the bill that's coming into play, the budget that's coming into play, they will tell you how much they think it's going to cost to implement. So what this is saying is that it's not good enough to just get a GAO score. We once the bill is passed, okay, the GAO score goes to the Senate. That's so that they can do their advise and consent role. The Congress, so they can do their advise and consent role. That's cool. When it comes over to the executive branch, we need OMB to score it, because OMB is going to actually go in and see how much it's going to cost. So what this executive order does, it puts for every new regulation y'all want to bring in. So let's say they pass a bill and the bill has 10 things, 100 things they want to implement. In order to implement those 100 things, they have to cancel 1,000 things. So this is going to also put the Congress in a very tight position. They can't be trying to add a bunch of new stuff, because if they do, it's not going to be able to be implemented, because the executive branch has said, no, we're not implementing whatever you guys pass. So this is, in my opinion, this is targeted at the Green New Scam, as President Trump calls it, where the Congress basically ordered people who didn't want it, they never told the people what they were doing, but ordered people that they could not have cars that weren't overflowing with electricity, meaning electric vehicles and stuff like that. Every car is an electric car. They could not have a car that was just a simple basic car that didn't have all that electric stuff in it, that you couldn't have toilets that had a proper amount of water in it. All the toilets had to be low flow. That you couldn't have regular light bulbs. That you couldn't have the regular light bulbs, the toilets, the cars. Something else with that you have to use green energy instead of coal energy. Like, these are not things that they asked people if they wanted. They basically said, this is the policy of the Congress, and the executive branch said, no matter how much it costs for individuals to be compliant with this, they have to figure it out. That's what has been the policy of the United States since Obama, for sure. They didn't do this with Bush, but they definitely did it with Obama. And that's why everything increased so much in cost, because in order to comply with the regulations and not get fined or have your business shut down or whatever, they had to jump through a lot of hoops. And it's been pretty outrageous to see this kind of play out and know and understand that it's because the Congress people didn't do the will of the people. The executive branch didn't protect the people from the Congress. And we have 3 branches of government to protect us from them. That way one branch can't get with another branch and then they just do whatever they want and we have no say. That's what this is supposed to prevent. And that's not what's been happening. They've been conspiring against us, we the people, to get their, ridiculous agenda passed. I mean, what American voted for USAID? None of them ran on USAID, and yet all of them funded it. So this is the kind of stuff that I'm talking about. You guys don't seem to, a lot of people don't understand that that's how it works. So now, before any regulation can be added, 10 old regulations have to be taken out. And also, if you're going to implement a new regulation, it can't cost but so much. The OMB and Roosevelt is a monster. It's putting a cap on it. So if you want to implement a regulation and it's going to cost too much, you got to find other regulations. So it's not a minimum of 10-1. It's if this is your most important regulation, the Congress decided this was the most important thing for the American people, you may have to get rid of all your regulations and only enforce that one because of how much that one costs to enforce. So it's going to put a complete stop to this congressional overreach of basically trying to implement their will because remind you, the Congress people are also getting funds from other outside people that are not Americans to do certain things. So it's going to stop the influence of these, I would call them these people, these not investors, like a George Soros or just these people who want a particular agenda to be pushed without consideration of how it affects the American people. So, I don't want to go too long on this, but there was one particular part I was going to stop, and I was like, no, let me just read the whole thing and provide my commentary. Here we go. This is in section 3, part B. For fiscal year 2025, which is in progress, the heads of all agencies are directed to ensure that the total incremental cost of all new regulations, including repeal regulations being finalized this year, shall be significantly less than zero. Listen, they can't, because normally what happens is whoever your sponsor, benefactor was that brought you in there, they are now expecting for you to handle certain things. And so what this does, it says, nah, we're not doing that. It's got to be less than zero. You can't add any new regulations. You can't write any letters, issue any orders, any of that stuff that's going to cost money. It's got to be zero. It's got to be zero to understand. It's got to be zero to implement. It's got to be zero to inform people on what's going on. You can't bring anything in that's going to cost money. This is a huge difference from the policy we've seen, like I said, in many different previous administrations. This is quite fiscally responsible. And so regulations are literally the secret. This is why the inflation has been so high. It's not the prices of stuff, it's the regulations that cause prices to be through the roof. And so this is making sure that regulation, the government cannot over government or over police. It's the people. It's not for us. It's really, the government is supposed to protect us from those people outside of the government, outside of the